Victoria's Black Swan Inn is a lush, 35-acre home and wedding venue cloaked by 100-year-old oak trees in San Antonio, Texas. While it's a romantic scene ideal for nuptials, it's also allegedly infested by the spirits of those who've lived and died on the property. Built in the mid to late 1800s on a plot of land where, 50 years earlier, 60 Mexican soldiers were killed in the Battle of Salado, the Greek Revival Manor has had a plethora of owners, many of whom were prominent San Antonio socialites and are also said to still be lingering there in the afterlife. Once operated as a dairy farm, the barn behind the primary residence is the most haunted building on the property. Many of the earlier occupants, including members of the Ripstein and Mahler families, spent their lives there. Later occupants included sisters Catherine Holbrook and Blanche Woods, Catherine's husband, and Blanche's children and grandchildren. Almost all of them are said to haunt the estate. The current owner, Joanne Rivera, lives in the stunning home with her family, and while it isn't actually a functional inn, she does partner with local ghost tour companies and has invited paranormal investigators in over the years. Some theorize that perhaps the paranormal activity is being caused by a particularly menacing anchor item, a porcelain doll. Tune into Dark House to hear the full details and countless tales of unsettling specters. This Mayan revival home designed by Frank Lloyd Wright Jr., the son of the legendary architect Frank Lloyd Wright, towers over Franklin Avenue at the bottom of the Los Feliz foothills. While its unique architectural character is certainly noteworthy, arguably the most interesting thing about the home isn't necessarily the block-style facade, which was inspired by the menacing yet beguiling opening of a cave or an ancient tomb. After it was built in 1926 for photographer John Soden and his young family, the house enjoyed years of hosting bohemian parties for Hollywood's in crowd. But when Dr. George Hodel moved into the house in 1945, its fate as the potential crime scene of America's most notorious cold case, the Black Dahlia, was sealed. Though the murder of Elizabeth Short remains unsolved to this day, by 1950, Dr. George Hodel became one of the prime suspects in her tragic case, and many true crime buffs are convinced that he carried out the crime right inside this iconic Los Feliz mansion. The home also went through a few stages of abandonment in the late 20th century, making it even more mysterious and spooky to passers-by. According to Steve Hodel, former occupant, retired LAPD investigator, and son of Dr. Hodel, several onlookers have noted its haunting trappings. According to Steve, in the 1970s, returned to the house and informed the then current owner, "This is a house of evil," and on another occasion, Edmund Teskey pointed to the house saying, "It's an evil place." Artists, philosophers, accountants, and politicians all played and paid there. Murders happened there. It's an evil place. During the same era, Dr. Hodel's daughter Tamar went inside the home and claimed to see the spirit of a young woman in the basement. Years later, in 2016, Ghost Adventures host Zach Bagans investigated the Soden house with Tamar's daughter Fauna, who claimed to see the exact same spirit her mother did. In 2011, LaToya Ammons moved into a small single-story home in Gary, Indiana, with her mother and her 3 young children. Only a few short months later, after reportedly experiencing the worst residential demon infestation since the Amityville Horror, Ammons brought her family to the emergency room in an attempt to help free them of demonic possession. After extensive evaluations by police, members of the local church, hospital staff, and the Department of Child Protective Services, the witnesses were torn. Half of them believed the house was infested by spirits and demons, and that the family was genuinely possessed by something paranormal, while the other half blamed psychological issues. Just like the best-selling book about the Amityville house turned into a national sensation, this modern instance of demonic possession went viral. The good news is that the Ammons family was able to find peace when they moved to Indianapolis, but the story, and the house itself, were still getting tons of attention. Ghost Adventure host and paranormal investigator Zach Bagans bought the property from Ammons' landlord in 2014 to shoot pseudo-documentary footage inside. Even though Bagans proceeded to tear it down, the Ammons house is about to get even more press. Oscar nominee Lee Daniels is directing a film based on the story, The Deliverance. It's set to stream on Netflix in 2024 and will feature Stranger Things star, Caleb McLaughlin. In 1886, an eccentric widow left her home in Connecticut for California's rural Santa Clara Valley to start a new life after the tragic loss of several family members. She wasn't the average widow, she was Sarah Winchester, the millionaire heiress whose fortune was derived from the gun that won the West, an increasingly controversial truth. Once in the Bay Area, during the height of spiritualism and well before the 19th Amendment, Winchester managed her own finances and acted on a passion for architecture and design by overseeing the never-ending construction project of a rambling mansion in San Jose. She named the rambling property Lanata Villa, but today, it's better known as the Winchester Mystery House. Her reclusive lifestyle, along with the restrictive gender norms of the era and the blood money she was associated with, caused neighbors and the local press to speculate, and legends quickly began to swirl about the mysterious woman and her bewildering house. Though it was a modern marvel at the time, with indoor plumbing, multiple elevators, a hot shower, and central heating, the mansion was appraised as having no value due to doors that opened to nothing but thin air, staircases that lead straight into the ceiling, and its maze of labyrinthine hallways. Legends began swirling, speculating that Winchester's bizarre architectural choices were an attempt to rid the home of unwelcome spirits of the dead killed by the Winchester rifle, but defenders swear she didn't have a superstitious bone in her body. Regardless, it's possible that Winchester herself still haunts the halls of the house-turned-museum today. Starting strong with a very scary house, the Lemp Mansion in St. Louis, which is known to be one of the most haunted places in America due to its tragic history and links to a wealthy beer baron. Adam Johann Lemp, a German immigrant, was the first person to produce and sell lager-style beer in the U.S. He stored the barrels in an underground cave system beneath the city to keep them cool pre-modern refrigeration. It was successful, but his son, William Lemp, is the one who really brought it to the next level. In the 1860s, William Lemp wanted to live closer to the industrial plant and start a family with his wife Julia, so they built the foreboding home in the historic Benton Park neighborhood right over the cave system. Everything seemed to take a turn for the worse in the new millennium, and William Lemp died by suicide in 1904 after his favorite of 5 sons, Frederick, died tragically due to complications of tuberculosis. A few years later, his wife also died of cancer in the house. In 1920, the youngest daughter, Elsa Lemp, mysteriously died in her home. Then, in 1922, after running the company for years and seeing it flounder during the Prohibition era, William Lemp Jr. shot himself in the same room William Sr. died in. One of William Jr.'s brothers, Charles Lemp, lived in the home from the 1930s until 1949 when he shot his own dog in the basement of the home before dying by suicide in his room. That same year, the youngest surviving Lemp child, Edwin, sold the house and transformed it into a boarding house, where reports of hauntings began. According to Destination America, witnesses have experienced burning sensations, slamming doors, disembodied moaning and crying, amongst other things. Today, the Lemp Mansion is a restaurant and in that also holds events, including weddings, murder mystery dinners, and even ghost hunting experiences. The Kasha House of Kaimuki in Honolulu, Hawaii has been shrouded in mystery for decades. Its first bad press mention hit the Honolulu Star just months after the attack on Pearl Harbor in 1941. According to the article, police responded to a call from a woman shouting, "She's trying to kill my children. She's trying to kill my children." When they arrived, they found a young Hawaiian boy, his 3 sisters, and his mother all shrieking and being tossed around by nothing. About 30 years later, other occupants reported similar attacks by an unseen force, which the responding officers corroborated. The 2 most common theories surrounding the source of these reported attacks are a demonic shape-shifting creature of Japanese folkloric origins known as the Kasha, and the angry spirit of a corpse buried in the backyard. Though it has since been torn down and replaced by condos, the dark energy still lingers, according to locals and residents. Massachusetts has no shortage of haunted mansions, it seems, and the S.K. Pierce Victorian is one of the state's eeriest. The original occupant, Sylvester Pierce, had just started making his fortune in the furniture business when he built this home for himself, his son, and his wife, Susan. As a man about town, he hosted many notable people in his 7,000-square-foot home throughout the years, including President Calvin Coolidge, Betty Davis, and Norman Rockwell. Only a week after moving into the home, Susan fell ill and passed away from a mysterious bacterial disease. A year later, he remarried Ellen, a woman 30 years his junior, and had 2 more children. Years later, when both Sylvester and Ellen had passed away, His sons embarked on a fiery feud about the property as well as the furniture company, but the Great Depression swept in and made their choice easier since the company basically went bankrupt. The youngest son, Edward, was given control of the home when he turned it into a boarding house. It became a hotspot for illicit activities according to local lore. As a result of these violent ends, guests have reported every kind of haunting imaginable, from visions of apparitions to flying objects, disembodied sounds, pressure, temperature drops, and more. More cursed than haunted, downtown LA's Hotel Cecil got such a bad rap that it actually changed its name to Stay on Main. If you're a true crime and paranormal superfan, you've likely already heard of it. Where to begin? So many bad things have happened here, there's literally an entire Wikipedia page dedicated to its violent history. The first recorded death by suicide is in 1931, followed by a long string of similar deaths in 1932, 1934, 1937, 1938, 1939, and 1940. At some point in the 30s, one man was pinned to the exterior wall by a truck. A woman murdered her newborn in the building in 1944, and the pattern of suicides continued into the 60s. In 1962, a woman jumped from the 9th floor window and landed on a pedestrian, killing them both. It's worth noting that 2 of the women who died by suicide apparently jumped while their husbands were asleep in the room. In 1964, Tenant Goldie Osgood was brutally murdered, a crime which has remained unsolved. Next, in the 80s, the infamous serial killer Richard Ramirez stayed at the hotel, and in the 1990s, Austrian serial killer Jack Unterweger lived there. Other weird things kept happening, but the weirdest is definitely the disappearance and death of 21-year-old traveler Elisa Lamb. A few weeks after Lamb went missing, her body was discovered in the rooftop water tank after visitors and tenants complained about a funky taste. They later found odd footage of her in the elevator from the night of her disappearance. It's difficult to make out what she's doing. It looks like she's either playing hide-and-seek with someone outside the elevator, or she's frightened and attempting to hide from someone, but the doors won't seem to shut. Authorities ruled the death accidental drowning, but because you need a key to access the roof, many suspect foul play.